This is modern Britain, where skyscrapers soar from city streets like gleaming temples of steel and glass, paying tribute to the gods of progress and development, where a telecommunications infrastructure transmits our thoughts, memories, and opinions at almost the speed of light, like a vast electromagnetic mind in constant motion. This tiny island that once ruled the waves has the 6th largest economy on planet Earth. Its GDP is almost $3 trillion. It is the epicenter of a global commonwealth. But for ordinary Britons, it seems, wealth is not all that common. An estimated 14 million people, or 20% of the population, live in poverty. Around 300,000 people are homeless, and on any given night, several thousands of those could be rough sleeping. Official numbers on rough sleeping are controversial, as they only take into account the people at a bedside on the night that they are counted. This has been acknowledged in Manchester, where strategic lead for homelessness, Mike Wright, was quoted in the Guardian newspaper as saying, "We know there are at least 500 people regularly rough sleeping in our region." Official numbers for the same time in 2018 reported only 278.
So for those who don't know, this is obviously a capital of football, a capital of music, a capital of, sadly, rain. We do a lot of that. But increasingly, I hope, we're being known as a place that is a capital of the campaign, and I hope the global campaign, to end the need for homelessness here and around the world.
I've called Manchester my home for almost 10 years now, and visible rough sleeping in the city is something that everybody can see is getting worse. I wanted to find out why.
Austerity. Austerity, simple. Decisions that are made by the powers that be, that we keep voting in. Apathy, lack of love and care, really simple. That's in my view, that's what it is. Somebody part of the street life in Manchester today, it's just in your face everywhere these days. It wasn't as bad as this. It was bad, but something's getting catastrophically worse. Carry on blaming the homeless people for the problem. Turning a blind eye, hoping it fixes itself. Minimal funding here, minimal funding there, hoping it goes away. Just been seen to be doing something about it, but really, everybody knows it's not enough.
To be honest, to me, I think homelessness is really a societal issue when it comes down to it. It's not simply enough to say that it's a few bad apples or a few people who are just a bit lazy. Realistically, what we're talking about here is a failure of society to really look after their own, you know? We're all 1 or 2 paychecks away from ending up in this situation. That really isn't the kind of society we should live in when there's such a huge amount of wealth in this country. And to me, it really just speaks volumes when you think about the fact that there isn't enough social housing for people who don't make as much as others, who are working class, etc., etc. Realistically, if someone's working hard, they should be able to afford a decent standard of living.
The numbers have exploded exponentially in terms of the people who are finding themselves in a homeless situation. So you can pinpoint that on a number of things. Primarily government policy. Since 2010, we've seen the numbers increase with the advent of the bedroom tax, the advent of benefit cuts and cuts to key services around mental health, around drug and alcohol addiction.
When we've had more money, government money being spent on issues around poverty and issues around mental health, we've been more able to pick people up before they hit rock bottom. Since the crash of 10 years ago, the reduction in public funding across a whole range of public services means that safety net has got bigger holes in it and more people are falling through than did a decade ago. And I don't think we can pretend that's not the case.
You can't cut things and expect situations not to get worse without a long-term plan. And when everybody's stretched, when everybody, is trying to do more than they have funding to do, we're not going to reach everybody.
We've seen lots of changes to services that operate to support people with vulnerabilities. And as a result of those changes, we've lost some incredibly important services that would have ordinarily have supported people. And now those services have gone, I think that's impacted on people and people aren't getting the support that they need. and therefore they end up rough sleeping.
I think austerity, without question, has been one of those clear examples where by cutting so much of the social services, whether you're talking mental health services, whether you're talking accommodation, whether you're talking family services, whatever the case may be, that's had such huge knock-on effects, leading to many people becoming homeless, whether that's hidden homeless or rough sleepers.
Some people have argued it's recession and the banking crash. We've seen other statistics that show that in previous recessions, homelessness dropped because the housing market readjusted and rental prices dropped, and people could actually get into the housing market in a way that they can't right now. Particularly over the last sort of 3 to 4 years, we've seen a 30% year-on-year rise in people accessing our services. You know, we've continued to do the work that we've done, but we're overwhelmed now in a way that we've never experienced before.
Some of the core reasons are still there, but increasingly we're seeing people evicted from private rented properties, you know, people that in the past would never have been at risk of homelessness, but they are now. Increasingly more sort of families. Homelessness is increasing, but I think that the causes of it are just getting worse through the welfare system. There's definitely not enough social housing out there for us to move people onto if they've been in temporary accommodation for a long time. But I think it's also fair to say that it's the same people that are being made homeless. I think there's a bit of a perception that it can happen to anyone, but the stats actually show that it's people that have grown up in poverty and experienced that as a child that are, you know, 10 times more likely to experience homelessness as an adult. So we can't forget that it's still hitting the same sort of groups of people that have suffered from poverty from a young age.
Between 2010 and 2016, government grants to local authorities in the UK decreased by over 50%. The reason for these cuts was given as austerity and the financial crash of 2008. As always, the people who were most affected by the cuts were the poorest and the most vulnerable. Although the economic situation is a huge and undeniable contributing factor to homelessness, Crisis.org says that 2/3 of homeless people cite drug or alcohol use as a reason for first becoming homeless. In The Globalization of Addiction, Dr. Bruce Alexander writes, "Today's rising tide of addiction is the consequence of people, rich and poor alike, being torn from the close ties to family, culture, and traditional spirituality. Perhaps for the most fragile among us, our very way of life in the modern world is traumatic."
There are some people who at the moment are so fragile they don't want to join the rest of us. That's why they stay rough sleeping. I mean, I've spoken to rough sleepers for 30, 40 years, and they have changed. I mean, I can remember going back 40 years, and quite a few rough sleepers were there by choice. They'd fallen out with their friends, their families, and they wanted time to pull themselves together. These days, a lot of people feel safer on their own rough sleeping. I know it's dangerous to rough sleep, but we are creating a society that doesn't seem to care, that likes to create insecurity.
The people that I've tended to work with have some very complex needs, really. And it may well be that there's been some adverse childhood experiences. They may well have grown up in a family where there's been substance misuse, there's been offending behaviour, mental health issues, and it becomes a generational thing.
It's not just about housing, is it? It's about your education, it's about what welfare you're entitled to, and your whole experience of life. I mean, I've met very few people that are entrenched rough sleepers that don't have real complex traumas in their past that you know, in order to move on, they'd have to deal with those, and that's a really big ask.
My experience of my own life and my experience with working in counselling people in rehab situations, the case is for people who've led a life that's led to such a withdrawal from society, whether it ends up in deep-rooted addiction or whether it's withdrawal from society to the extent that someone ends up street homeless, there's usually something deep-rooted underneath all that. Some sort of traumatic experience perhaps in childhood or in younger years, or some people in adult years, and just not having the wherewithal to get through that. I feel like in my experience it was maybe feeling worthless, less than, different, shamed, something wrong with me, I'm not the same as everybody, I can't connect. Just being that disconnected from other human beings.
how I went from the situation of being married and in a family, having a good job, working the NHS. I was working with vulnerable people and using lots of drugs at the time, and slowly but definitely surely, I became more and more chaotic.
Rather than going to university, someone phoning me up and saying, "Yeah, Glyn, I'm leaving town. Do you want to come with me?" And without a second thought, I was in his van and we were off. And then I linked up with people who just were on the outskirts of society. One thing led to another, and I just spiralled further and further out of control into my escape, which eventually led to serious drugs and taking them, and with serious methods to a serious extent.
I think it's a challenge for every member of the community. I mean, why are so many people turning to drugs and alcohol? Why have so many people got mental health problems? And you can't lay it just on the NHS and the police as the only people who'll deal with that problem. It's a problem that affects every individual in this country.
I mean, clearly people make bad choices, and some of those bad choices may make our situation worse. I wouldn't recommend anybody to take some of the drugs that people are taking on the streets, and you say, well, that's a choice. But actually, if you're out on the street in the cold for hour after hour after hour, and somebody's able to sell you something that will make the hours pass like minutes, then I can see why at one level it's a rational choice to take that stuff. Although I would always urge people not to do so.
Escapism, addictions, bad choices. Who among us can say we are innocent of these? How many of us can name the fears we are running from? Perhaps those experiencing homelessness are just the tip of an iceberg of which we are all part. Most of us just lay still and silent beneath the waves, veiled in shadow, yet are inextricably linked to the visible peak that shows its face. And in the full glare of the midday sun, perhaps we are all sinking. To better understand the day-to-day reality of being homeless, where people sleep, how they survive, and the lengths they feel compelled to go to just to make it through the day, I followed Andrew and Glyn to some of the places where they used to sleep rough, and talked with a few more people who experienced long-term homelessness.
This is where I used to sleep. Used to sleep underneath this canopy, Tony, and in between a couple of these solid brick structures that would keep us dry and out of the wind, out of sight. Slightly different to how it used to be. They've reinforced it since we were here, probably because we were here. We used to swing out over the river and round the other side of the fence. At the end of this path, and then the same distance further on, there'd be like an opening space where you could bed down, you're under a shelter, there was walls around you, and you just see out on the river, and it was beautiful. It's still nice. It was very green and wildlife. It was a beautiful place to wake up, when you're in such a depressed situation. They've since put this fence up, which I'd get around that. But I wouldn't like to be doing that today, but I'm sure we would. I'm sure this wouldn't have stopped us either.
Sometimes I'd stay in the bus station, or there was also a place in Stockport town centre. There's the viaduct there, and there was like a little bit of a place where there was people sort of sleeping rough under there, and I'd spend time there as well and stuff, and it just became kind of lost in that situation.
It's strange really, because it's a long time since I've been round here. It looks like people are still sort of hanging around here, kind of thing. So up here, there was, I can still go through to it. It was like kind of off the beaten track, if you like, sort of thing, but it was sort of somewhere where, if it was raining or anything, at least you were kind of dry, really. People are still doing the same thing that we were doing a few years ago, kind of thing. So it does feel it feels very strange. I was quite shocked really when I got up here. I mean, I remember sort of having, my leg ulcer, was was breaking down, and I had a great gaping wound in my leg, and I wasn't really doing very much to look after it. And I would imagine there's people about here now that maybe are probably not in a good place health-wise and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It does feel very strange being back. I say I've not been here since I got clean, and it's it feels quite sad. I remember sort of being very, very heavily under the influence. I was using lots of amphetamine at the time, and I didn't really sleep properly anyway, but it was just having somewhere to sort of hang out and to use. I think for me it puts into perspective how you kind of lose that sense of reality almost. And at the time I thought this was all right. I did. I really thought this was all right. The fact that I was here and I thought I was having a great time. Upsets me actually just seeing it.
Are you okay?
Yeah. I just I didn't know how I'd feel about coming back here today, to be honest with you.
I think the key to being on the streets, you know what I mean, like same as out in the field in the army, is like a good sleeping bag, you know what I mean, no matter where you are in the army. I mean, you don't have tents and all the rest of it, you know what I mean, when you're especially on exercise, you've got a good sleeping bag, you're warm, you know what I'm saying. That was the same with the streets, you know what I mean. I come to learn that, yeah, sleeping bag's key. I found like a disused rail, it was like a rail house near Hardwick train station. It was like on a back street near the train station. It's got like car units, where they're fixing cars, people's there in the day. They had like the 24-hour petrol station around the corner, so I've got like water from there, water to wash in there as well. It become the norm basically. I was there that long, I mean it's like 7 years, a long time, it become the norm. I got to like know places where to get food, and eventually, I mean, I learned how to survive on the streets basically. I didn't at first.
So we're in Chinatown, down a back street. This is an area where, if we looked around now, we'd find a lot of street homeless people hanging around this area. For me, back then, the reasons I'd be around here would be the hot air blowing out from the air conditioning system, which has been boxed off here at the minute. In the cold winter months, it wouldn't be uncommon for me or anybody to be gathering around these air conditioning systems just to get a bit of some warmth from it. The only downside, or the real downside, comes with that is the smell of all the delicious Chinese food that's cooking in this area. And of course, you ain't eating like everybody else is. You see people walking backwards and forwards, filling their bellies with booze and lovely food. And I mean, you're sat here. I was sat here one night, and I remember seeing two religion teachers from a school, and I've no idea what their attitude to homelessness is, but just to see them walking past, and it reminded me of the life that I've been brought up in, which I had a comfortable upbringing, and then here I am in contrast to that. It was a surreal moment being back here in the dregs, and there's times where I've slept here next to these heaters, just trying to stay warm at night.
One specific time sticks out to me, because obviously the British way of work at weekends and Christmas and all that, you know what I mean? I remember Christmas time, it was snowing, and there was a little kitten, and all the workmen was in the van outside, because it was near going up to the platform, so it was all packed. I was all sat in the van outside, and this kitten was going around the van crying. This was like Christmas Day, you know what I mean? It was like crying, and I remember it snowing, and this little white kitten, and I couldn't help it, you know what I mean? Because if I'd come out the house, then it would have come on top. I think it was like Christmas Day or Boxing Day, that, you know what I mean? I remember that specifically.
And what did you feel about that?
I felt bad for the cat, to be honest, even though I was in a bad position myself. I'm an animal lover, and I love animals. I just remember that. I still remember it.
One of the worst things that I remember about being homeless was being damp and wet in a city like we choose to be homeless in Manchester, the damp and the wet. So once you were wet, you were staying wet. You were wet all day long. You were wet at night when you were sleeping. There was a night, I remember, there was one guy, for whatever reason, he had nowhere to stay that night. He'd been turfed out by the police or whatever it was, and he was just stuck. So we let him stay with us here. And I had spare clothes. I gave him some dry clothes because he was soaking wet. And it was winter time, it was cold weather. And I think it was the next night, he didn't die here, but I think it was the next night that he died wherever he was of hypothermia. And that's a dark sort of incident that people did die, you know, there was overdoses and the weather, the conditions.
One kid that I actually grafted with from time to time, someone come up to him while he was asleep in a doorway and poured petrol fluid all over him and set him on fire, or set his sleeping bag on fire. At this point, I'd been pissed on, you know what I mean? I'd been kicked, you know what I mean? I'd got into fights over it and stuff like that. But this kid, when they set him on fire, you know, it shocked me. I mean, he survived, and he survived relatively unscathed because it was just a sleeping bag that they set on fire. But nevertheless, you know, you might be homeless, but you still got feelings and you still got fears, and you still want to be treated with at least an element of respect. You know what I mean, or something close to.
You know, there was all kinds of just degrading stuff going on really at the time. People were sleeping with each other, you know, for drugs and stuff. And I remember this guy that was living in the flat, in the squat, wanted my partner at the time to do something to him sexually, so we could get drugs, sort of thing. And it was like completely, it completely goes against how, I'm a father, I've got children, I mean, they're growing up now, but, and I'm sort of allowing my partner at the time to do these sort of sexual acts so that we can feed our drug addiction, sort of thing. So it's kind of, I didn't want to do it, but at the same time doing it. And that was quite horrible. It was absolutely awful.
I've resigned myself to not having ever seen my kids, my family or anything again. I had a little circle. It's probably about a 2 mile radius of where I begged, where I slept, where my dealer lived, or where the dealers meet you. That was my little circle, and I think I'd resigned myself to dying in that circle, and I was just content with it all ending there, really.
I was deeply unhappy. I remember sort of being this guy basically who was trying to sort of be all things to all people, trying to fit into all these different situations and doing things that basically just went against my values, sort of thing, I suppose, because, I believe, that I was probably brought up quite, to be quite an honest guy, really, and I'm sort of going against all that sort of thing, and being in situations where, people would it'd be like people were doing all kinds of crime, burglaries, shoplifting, stuff like that. And all that kind of stuff, it didn't kind of sit quite naturally with me.
I remember a lady saying to me, I was shoplifting. Well, I say it wasn't shoplifting, it was just blatant robbery, really. I went in, grabbed what I was grabbing and started heading for the door. So she's like, "You're not going out with them?" And I was like, I am. Because I was withdrawing one day, and she gave up because obviously I'm a male. She didn't know if I had a weapon or anything, so she stopped and she's like, "You're just a piece of shit. You're a scumbag. You're a scum of the earth." And I turned around and went, "I know," and then just walked out and carried on walking. Do you know, it's like I'd accepted what I'd become. Like these women that were in these shops, their job must have become misery for them, knowing that me or another shoplifter, and we, like I say, with addiction, it wasn't like sneaking things in your bag and scurrying off without being seen. It was blatant. I'm having this. Do what you can to stop me. Do you know what I mean? So it was. They must have got up in the morning and thought he could come in today. They must have really affected them. But I didn't give it a second thought. It was my need. I'll take.
Basically robbing bikes and buildings, empty buildings that was up for rent and up for sale, breaking in there because majority of them didn't have the alarm on. They don't put the alarm on for some reason. Just broke in, done the scrap. And that's how I got my money. I sort of enjoyed doing the scrap, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm pretty happy anyway, and it's like, I just enjoyed doing it, you know what I mean? Like, I enjoyed doing it. So I just sat there begging all day. It's just like boring, isn't it? It's just like, and it's like the buzz of like breaking in buildings and the adrenaline, the risk and all that, and it all goes hand in hand, doesn't it?
I had people come up to me and saying, "What are you going to use this for?" You know, if I give you money, what you're going to use it for? You're going to use it for drugs. Sometimes I'd just be honest and say, yeah, you know, and tell them exactly how it is. Other times, I don't know if it was a feeling I got or what. I'd be like, nah, it's for a room or I'd never say it's for food because they would then go away and buy me food. Do you know what I mean? And I always had enough food. You know what I mean? People was always giving me food. You know. So all I was about was money. I wanted the money. I don't know if it's something that I kind of learned through all of music or whilst I was on the streets. I was able to weigh people up dead quickly, you know what I mean, and know what the best story was to tell them, because I told them all sorts of stories.
During the making of this film, one opinion I encountered a lot was the idea that homelessness is a lifestyle choice, not too different from choosing to live, for example, in the fresh air of the countryside. And those that are homeless only need to make the choice to come off the streets and their problems will be solved. While there is always some amount of personal responsibility involved in everything we do, I can't help thinking that this is society's way of justifying the problem and laying the blame firmly at the tired feet of the homeless, when the problem is far more complex than that. When we hear that a homeless person has died on the streets, how many of us look the other way and chalk it up to a consequence of their lifestyle? How many of us close our hearts to the suffering of those less fortunate? Because to acknowledge it would reveal something about ourselves, something that leaves a bitter taste in our mouths. That this is all happening right outside our front doors. We step over the wretched, we circumvent the lonely, we sidestep the destitute, and turn deaf ears to the pleas of the poor. Too few of us ever ask why. Is homelessness a lifestyle choice?
I've met people who say it is. I'm going back now. The first one I met was in the 1960s, a chap who used to sleep rough on the promenade at Blackpool, who belonged to a very wealthy family in Preston. And sometime in his 30s, he'd had a breakdown. And in his 60s, he was sleeping rough. And every so often, he'd go back for some more money off the family and then carry on living the life he led. So there are odd people who do want to live rough. But in the main, I would think most people would, particularly in winter, would like a warm, dry bed and food in the stomach.
Sometimes people are in rough sleeping because they're trying to avoid some issues in their lives, and there tends to be fear that puts people there. So you may hear people say, oh, I want to stay homeless, or I want to stay on the streets. But most of the time it hits November, December, and we're having conversations with the same people saying, oh, I can't do it anymore, I need to get out, I need to get off, get me in a hospital, get me anywhere. So that to me says, actually they don't really want to be on the streets. There's other issues in their lives that means they are on the streets.
I've never been convinced by the idea that homelessness is somehow a lifestyle choice. If it is a choice, it's a choice made when the alternative choices are so bad that it's a forced choice in that kind of sense.
Homelessness, I would say, isn't a lifestyle choice. My experience has been it isn't a lifestyle choice. It isn't something that I decided, when I was working and doing a full-time job and was married and bringing up children. I didn't say to myself, I want to be homeless.
I think you can make a case for some sort of lifestyle, but if you're talking about choice, you've got to think about what people's options are, really. So you make choices based on the options that are available in front of you. And people that are experiencing homelessness or sleeping rough, their options look very different to mine or yours. You'll make a decision based not only on sort of your options today, where can I put my head down, what am I going to spend some change on, but also your experiences of the choices you've made in the past. If you've made certain choices to trust people in the past, hasn't worked out, you're not going to make that same choice again. So it's about people's, experiences and history of their behaviour and how others have behaved towards them that make up that choice, if you like.
Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. I wondered how it must feel to be bedding down on a cold street, alone, broke, with only the long dark night ahead of you for soul-searching and self-examination. What drug-fueled dreams would be born from this lonely vigil, and for how long would they bestow their temporary respite until they turned to nightmares?
It was at night, really. The day's finished and you just then go to sleep for a few hours to start begging again in the morning. And I did used to lie there and think about my kids and what, you know, what I'd put them through. And but like I say, I think it got to the point where they'd have been better off without me. That was my opinion, and I just couldn't see a way out. I'd tried for years. I'd had home detoxes, been on script and withdrew myself. I could only go a couple of months, if that, without picking up again. I just couldn't deal with the pressure of life, really. And this way, it had gone, it had been lifted.
First thing in the morning, when I'm rattling, or last thing at night when I'm about to lie down in a derelict building. Those are the times that I really questioned why I was there, what was I doing, how have I ended up here. I've had careers, I've lost careers, do you know what I mean, through drugs. You know, when, I'm an ex-boxer, do you know what I mean, and I was a good boxer, you know what I mean, and so all these things flashed through my mind. How could I go from being a graphic designer, boxing for the British title, how could I go from those things to sleeping in doorways? In fact, the night after I boxed for the British title, I was sat in a gaff, bladdered, smoking weed, and my brother turned around to me and goes, I can't believe it. I'm like, what? He goes, you boxed for the British title last night, and now look at you. And kind of just stayed that way,
But like the things that I didn't enjoy was obviously the Christmases. 7 Christmases, a lot of fucking Christmases, It's like very lonely. It was shocking, like I had a daughter as well, thinking of her.
So did you not see your daughter for the 7 years you were on the streets?
No, even not for 7 years on them streets, even like majority of her life as well, because I chose drugs, I was selfish. I chose drugs, that's the bottom, that's just what happened. The thing with the streets, it grinds you down, bit by bit, that's what it is. Grinds you down slowly. You know what I mean? It's just like, you're just mentally drained, you know what I mean? You're physically drained, you're tired, you're worn out.
As the years went by, it was less the practicality of it, just get on with it, but the thoughts kept flooding in of, here we go again. Is this what it's really come to? I thought it was going to get better. I thought, because I kept saying maybe this time next year, like Delphi and Rodney, you couldn't escape from the reality that if nothing changed, nothing was going to change. And it was just, this is it. It was that dawning of that reality that, oh yeah, this is actually it. Here we go again. Can I carry on? Can I carry on like this? Because I don't want to.
I mean, it seems like a different lifetime now because, I was probably had psychosis and stuff at the time and stuff. And I kind of got to a stage where I thought, I just can't go on like this. And I would say suicide was probably a real option, I would say, for I got to a point where I just thought, I can't cope like this anymore.
Everybody who finds redemption from a chaotic lifestyle has their own rock bottom, their own defining moment from which they know they cannot allow themselves to sink any lower. And so, a corner is turned, and the long, slow, uphill journey towards recovery begins. Some don't make it past this crossroads. Instead, they dig deeper, not realizing, or not caring, that they are digging their own graves. A rock bottom is often coming face to face with our own mortality, seeing our bodies disintegrate before our eyes, seeing the tears on the faces of our loved ones as they are faced with the sight of their brother, sister, father, or mother in a hospital bed, balanced upon the brink between life and death. Homelessness has a devastating effect on physical and mental health. It is often only with hindsight that we realise just how close we came to losing everything.
I mean, one thing we need to do whilst you talk about risk is that those who are already homeless, how do they access healthcare? I mean, I've been involved recently with a charity Walking with the Wounded, where people who've been in the armed forces who are homeless can come and stay for a few months so they can have a stable address. And you overlook how important that is. They can't claim benefits, they can't go on training projects unless they have a fixed address. So somehow or other, we have to find a way for those who are homeless to at least give them a fixed address so they can get benefits, they can go into different training projects, and more importantly, they can register for healthcare.
I think one of the hardest things I've found is trying to send out letters to people to tell them they've got an appointment with a mental health team when that person doesn't even have an address. So where's the letter going to go to? Another issue that people face is literacy. A lot of people can't read and write. Then when they miss their appointment, they're told, well, you're off the waiting list because you didn't keep your appointments. It's not the right way to engage people and build trust.
I've worked with many people who were diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver years and years ago and haven't been to hospital in 5 years. You know, and obviously the impact of that lack of contact with the hospital, who may be sending letters out to somewhere they were sofa surfing at 5 years ago, that lack of having that stable home is going to have an absolutely massive detrimental effect on your health, and it's life-threatening. You know, people are dying because they've got unmet health needs.
Once you're on the streets, you've got the challenge of addictions, mental health, the weather. So there's that aspect of just surviving. We have a nurse who works on sites. She sees a lot of trench foot, a lot of abscesses, and so physical health deteriorates really rapidly when you hit the streets.
You obviously see people who are especially rough sleeping, entrenched, experiencing trench foot, for example. These things that you expect to be health conditions that are hundreds of years old.
I ended up in hospital with an abscess in the left side of my groin that spread down my leg. I was the only person on this ward that had 2 legs. Everyone either had just one or both legs missing. I come out, straight back to the streets, and about 2-3 months later, I was back in hospital again. I woke up, I was just racked with pain. I couldn't move. Started getting dead delirious, you know what I mean? I didn't know where it was a lot of the time. The next thing, I remember thinking, you know, I'll feel better tomorrow, I'll feel better tomorrow. And every day, I got worse and worse. To the point where I just knew I was dying. Gets into hospital, full on intensive care. I mean, I was surrounded by doctors and nurses, and you know, and they was picking me off one thing, scanning me, picking me off another, scanning me, you know, and I remember one of the nurses going, she drew blood, and it was a nightmare getting blood out of me, you know, all my veins are like, so they're sticking pins in me everywhere. So eventually got me, she goes, oh my God, your blood's hot. You know what I mean? And I knew that couldn't be good. And anyway, so I was in that state for, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, 10 days. Turns out in that 2 weeks, I'd nearly died twice. So over the next couple of weeks, somewhere in that room, my thinking changed.
I ended up having endocarditis, which is like bugs in my bloodstream through a dirty hit or whatever, and an abscess in my groin. So it was the abscess that took me in hospital. Luckily, they found the endocarditis. I also had a DVT that was from my ankle to my groin. The abscess, they said if I'd presented myself 48 hours later, well, they said you wouldn't present yourself 48 hours later. It was about to burst inside you, and you would have died. So I just thank God that never happened.
Come pretty on top mentally, you know what I mean? My head was not right one bit. Ended up getting off the bus somewhere near Stretford, like near the motorway. I ended up walking down the motorway basically. The next thing, all the traffic, because it come up on the thing, all the traffic was stopping, and one thing, then all the traffic stopped, then I got on the bridge, I was going to jump off. and the police come and all the rest of it, negotiators. Ended up coming down in the end eventually anyway, because they got on the phone to my mum got on the phone and my mum was crying. That was my main objective, to get in contact with family, which the negotiator did. He sent someone to my mum's. My mum got on the phone and basically I come down off the bridge. Then in my eyes, I seemed like the job was done then, you know what I mean? So I tried running away from the police. I remember getting tasered off the police and that did, I ripped that off, it didn't work then. They all jumped on me and he was tasing me on the floor, they were trying to calm me down, and I think it was 3 times he tasered me in the back. And I stuck it on my back and it ended up with marks on the back.
I remember getting into the rehab in Sheffield, and I remember, and I didn't know this until time after, is that nobody wanted to share the bedroom with me. It was like shared bedrooms and nobody wanted to, and nobody would say anything to me. And basically I found out afterwards I stunk. I had this real horrible smell, and it were like I had a pair of shoes that I'd been wearing sort of since before, you know, there were sort of shoes that I'd been sleeping out rough, and there was a horrible smell, and nobody would say anything to me. Nobody would say anything to me about it whatsoever, and I was like, I think it was like I had some like trench foot or something, and that was awful. It was really awkward. It's just come back to me this morning that how little and how bad my personal hygiene had got, and how bad, you know, my got really bad. And what upsets me that to think about that, how, you know, I'd lost myself in you know, you know, I think, you know, I didn't think I was worth it really, kind of thing, and you know that, and I suppose that, you know, the drugs and everything, I just lost that that sense of identity, who Andrew is, who I am as a person. You know, I wasn't being a father. You know, I'd lost my marriage. I'd lost pretty much everything, really.
Poverty, homelessness, healthcare, the declining social fabric. These are issues which most people look to politicians to solve. At the same time, though, few people can be naive enough to believe that this will ever happen. Ernest Benn, the British writer and uncle of Labour MP Tony Benn, described politics as the art of looking for trouble, finding it whether it exists or not, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. Some commentators take it even further and state that most politicians are only looking out for their own elitist interests, and any focus on solving social problems is nothing more than empty gestures to appease the public. A simple look at the facts is quite telling. A study by the Office for National Statistics found that the poorest 10% of households had debts 3 times greater than their assets, compared with the richest 10%, who amassed a wealth pile 35 times larger than their total debts. As the gulf between rich and poor widens, perhaps we need to look for ways to build bridges. Bridges not built of concrete, but of conscience. Bridges not to carry cars and trucks, but compassion. Bridges not to connect towns and cities, but the hearts and minds of the human family. Perhaps, as members of this family, we all share the burden of responsibility to help achieve this.
I mean, we're building literally thousands of new homes in Greater Manchester at the moment. I've never in my life seen so much residential development taking place. But yeah, the numbers of homeless people is rising. There's something wrong there.
Do you have any insight into what that might be?
Politics. Politics seems to create more problems than really exist.
You know, we are citizens, we live in a democratic country. You've got to hold your MPs and your government to account for what they do, even if that's just like the basic level of our responsibility. We've got to be able to demand things of our government and hold them to account as citizens, as people with voting power.
We've had enough of people dying on the streets because they're homeless, and the government is not doing enough to protect them. We feel frustrated that people are literally dying in a country that is really developed, and there's obviously a lot of wealth in the city. So yeah, we're protesting, we're acting in solidarity of homeless people and people without secure accommodation.
I was a single disabled parent who was hounded by the DWP for years because I was unwell and I had what's known as an invisible illness. Due to their latest load of sanctions, my benefits were completely stopped, and without the support of DPAC and Streets Kitchen, I would have been homeless and completely isolated. So that's why I've come here today to show my solidarity.
Basically, I've come out today. Over the last week, we've seen catastrophic levels of homeless people dying in doorways. This is something that needs to be addressed. It is a political problem, and it has been created by a government. In such a short space of time, we have seen homelessness double. We call ourselves a civilised society, yet we are so primitive we let people die in doorways. That don't sit right with my conscience, so that's why I'm here today.
I think one of the big problems with homelessness is that people think that the homeless are a different type of person. People don't seem to realise you can be in full-time employment. Because of rising rents, you are out of employment. In my borough of Lewisham, if you're on benefit now, because of the new benefit cap, you are no longer entitled to social housing. We have people in London who are too poor to qualify for council housing. That's how crazy it's got, and they have to go to Birmingham or Leicester or Manchester. And unfortunately, people are apathetic, but people don't realise if you take away affordable housing, who's going to teach your kids in your primary school? Who's going to be in your hospital when you need a nurse or a doctor if they can't afford social housing? Who's going to be on your streets when you get issues that you need help with? We actually need to completely review housing. It shouldn't be about profit. Housing should be about social and economic need. As a homeless man living on the streets 30 years ago, I never thought 30 years on I would still be campaigning against the housing crisis. Now, when everywhere we look we see empty buildings, empty shops, which could be homes, left to rot, while people in their doorways are left to rot. And it's just totally outrageous and unacceptable. The real cost of poverty in the UK is about 78 billion, according to the Roundtree Foundation. And we have a huge crisis. It's an economic crisis. And if people don't care about the poor, they don't care about the homeless, they should care about the economics, because the cost of it on housing people or putting people in expensive bed and breakfasts or building council housing comes from the taxpayer.
Do you know, I was in the UK Parliament for a long time, but I can say this as a recovering MP. I don't believe politicians are ever going to solve this at their level. The way we will change the reality for people is by building a bottom-up movement from the grassroots, connecting all sectors of society, bringing people together. A movement here in Greater Manchester, in the UK, nationally, internationally.
I'm not saying anything that no doubt people who are watching this and yourselves as well already know that, you know, politicians lie, and they'll tell us that, you know, funding's greater than it's ever been, or that it's going where it's needed, and it's not, what's going on is not affecting homelessness and all the other difficulties, the NHS and everything else. But I don't know, it seems to me it's like the Emperor's New Clothes to me. It's blatantly obvious. It's lack of funding, lack of love, lack of care.
There's always cynicism in the public eye anyway around politicians. Do you know, I knock on many a door when it's campaigning season and I'm told, well, you're all the same. I'm not voting for any of you, you're all the same. That's life, that's what people think. I feel very privileged to be in this role as an elected member, and I will always use that platform to raise awareness around things like homelessness, mental health and health-related issues. So I think it's about making sure that I spread the message with my colleagues and always try and make sure that we raise the profile of people who need our help and support.
I mean, I used to be very actively involved in politics, but I gave up in 1990 because I didn't see it as the way forward, the way you could quickly and pragmatically help people with different challenges and problems. And I found over the last now 27 years that working within the voluntary sector, you can actually make things happen. I mean, I'm humbled as Lord Lieutenant, going around different voluntary organisations, finding people of very modest means who do an amazing amount of work. You know, within food banks, but also within lots of other charities and organisations. Look at the charitable sector in this city, it's fantastic. And look at the majority of people who are rolling their sleeves up and doing the dirty jobs. It's people of very modest means, but they're not prepared to let people just wallow in poverty.
We've all got a part to play in helping end homelessness. Whether that's lobbying an MP to change policies on housing and rented properties, to serving in a drop-in centre like ours, to just being polite to the people who are sat out on the streets begging. Not necessarily giving them money, I wouldn't recommend that, but just building a relationship with them so they can just feel like they're human beings and part of society and not ignored or a dirty problem.
What I think is really important is early years investment and the prevention agenda. So when somebody's got to that point where they're already at crisis points and they're already experiencing mental health issues, substance misuse and street homelessness, that's gone too far. What we need to be doing is really investing in early years, building resilient communities, speaking about emotional well-being when children are young, right from conception really. We're talking about what good parenting looks like, when you bring a child into the world, how do you make sure that education's right, all of those things. And I think prevention is the way forward, how we change things generationally, but that's only seen over a series of years.
But I think there's a real challenge there for organisations to step outside their comfort zone and their discipline. Different disciplines talk completely different languages. You know, they've got completely different ideas of how to support service users, of how to share data, you know, even down to the real simple things like that. But in order to support people fully, we need to break down the fact that these disciplines all serve a single person.
Do you think that it's idealistic to think that we can eradicate homelessness and rough sleeping?
Yes, it is, but let's be idealistic. What's wrong with that? You know, it should be the ambition for us all to see that we're all sharing in the wealth of this country. And I don't mean that in a political sense, but I do see lots of surplus wealth in this country that could be used for better purposes. And I say that is not political. That's well, I believe I'm a practicing Christian, and I would have thought that's part of my fundamental Christian belief.
I don't see it as solving it quickly because those big forces in society, reductions in public spending, are still going on. But I think it's something that we need to continue to have a high priority about because people's lives are being wrecked and ruined through it. People who in better circumstances are very capable, productive members of society.
You know, homelessness is sort of caught up between health, housing, benefits, criminal justice. All of these things have a part to play. But yeah, you've got to be able to believe that it can end, because it's about people's ability to live proper lives, and everybody, you know, to live full lives, and everybody has that ability. Some people just need a bit more support to do that.
One of our passions is that we empower people to make good choices themselves. And I think there should be enough infrastructure and enough opportunities within our economy for people to not have to be homeless. But equally, we don't want to just do it all for them, because we're disempowering people. We're institutionalising people really to rely on something other than themselves to fix the problem for them. But I do think that comes back to what we talked about earlier. It's society's problem, children, families, and helping people journey away from poverty that, you know, as a child would fix the problem in the long term. But yeah, I think for our society, if we addressed some of those issues, which we could do, if we have the will, we've got the resource, I believe, but have we got the will to address some of those issues, then we could see rough sleeping and homelessness being ended. So my hope is that we come up with some of these solutions and follow them through and see a revolution, and actually people then look back and go, that was the moment in history when this problem was begun to be eradicated, and we now live in the fruit of that. That's my hope.
I often visit places like this. I feel a closeness towards people who are homeless in town. And, you know, I don't have contemptuous feelings towards these locations. It's a part of my past. Look, I've mentioned before, I've got a lot of help, and I've been managed to get helped out of that situation. And I ended up in a flat just over there, a few minutes walk away. And I come back from work and often cut through this way just to reflect on how things have changed for me. But also on what is still a reality for a lot of people. I do believe that I've been blessed to be alive through all the experiences that I endured and went through. And I strive today to put those experiences to good use. So I don't, you know, it doesn't bring me down being in a place like this. It makes me feel more alive, actually.
Nearly 11 years clean now from substances. I've got a nice little flat. I think I'm doing okay. I think my situation is good. I've got a job that I enjoy doing. Relationship with my kids is a work in progress. My son Stephen, he's in the process at the moment of going through a gender change. So he's actually living as a woman now. So he's living as Ella. So I have a new daughter at the moment. That's quite a big thing. I know that if my lifestyle was the same as what it was and I'd stayed in that lifestyle, there's no way, shape or form I would have been involved in that. There's no way she would have been able to share that situation with me. She's living in Essex at the moment. I think I'm quite a good parent today.
So we've just moved around the corner from the last location that we filmed at, where I was sleeping in the waterworks, and we're outside the building where I celebrated my stag do late last year. So, you know, this is something that I never would have dreamed of, what's going on in my life today. I've got two beautiful stepkids who are watching this going on, they're cheering silently behind the camera now. A beautiful wife, and what a transformation from, you know, just round the corner, the way things were, and then to be able to walk around here and then walk past this place. And it was no particular reason that this was chosen in any relation to the homelessness, but wow, what an irony, you know, to just yards away from where I was sleeping rough. I've got a peace in my life that I never dreamed possible. I've got a career that I'm establishing. I'm studying at college. As you can imagine, there's a lot of mixture of feelings. There's a lot of different feelings.
If somebody out there, you know, sort of watches this film at some point or whatever, you know, and sees that, I would say just try not to give up hope. It won't be a straightforward road. It's not going to be a simple, you know. However, you know, there is people out there who do care, do give a shit. And I've learned that myself the hard way sometimes, and I have to sort of believe in people.
It's quite simple in my mind. If you have not got a good home, you really haven't got anything else in life. You cannot have health without a home, a place to call home. You cannot have a good life. You cannot develop yourself, your potential. A good home is everything. And for me, it should be a human right in UK and international law that we should aim to give every single citizen on this planet a place to call home. And we're trying to build that principle from the ground here in Greater Manchester.
But the key thing with all relationships is that we engage face to face, and we engage on a level, that we treat people with the the dignity that they have. I mean, for me as a person of faith, I have to see every other person as a child of God, as somebody of equal dignity and status as my own. And I often find I don't give money to people on the streets. I don't even give food, because there's not really a shortage of food on the streets. And I'd rather people came off the streets to find food in some of the centres where they can get wider help. But I would always try and stop when I'm going around the city centre and talk to one or two people who are homeless, who I see there, and just having that adult conversation, either talking about the weather or talking about what's going on in the city or whatever it may be. Not talking about their homelessness directly, but just talking with somebody as another human being of equal dignity with oneself. And I think to do that is actually crucial, because that's how we begin to restore the dignity that people have lost. And it's also how we begin to understand how like us someone who's become homeless really is.
Once upon a lifetime, many years ago, when the fire still burned in my veins, hanging around that dirty old town, there was always some place to go, staying out all night and getting late. I've been thinking about those long lost days in that town where my heart resides. One man left to change his mind, another man stayed and died inside. Oh, ain't it funny how the time flies? A lifetime in the blinking of an eye, and we're all just trying to get by under the roof of the sky. My oh my, sitting in the doorway, just waiting out the rain, wondering who to love and who to blame. Wasting time waiting on a sunrise when I'll do it all over again. Shooting up this poison in my veins. Or maybe tomorrow I will change. I'll walk these lonely streets I can't abide. The devil tripped me up mid-stride, down in a concrete paradise. So my blood runs cold and my tears run dry. All the people pass me by, and we're all just trying to get by under the roof of the sky. My oh my, and we're all just trying to get by under the roof of the sky.